Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is that it is worthwhile taking some time to understand what really happened when Iran captured 10 U.S. sailors who, for 40 minutes, wandered off course. As of now, it should be clear to everyone that the ship's GPS was working and that they had plenty of fuel. The real issue here, and the real intention in terms of humiliation, was to totally embarrass the United States. Also humiliated were President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif of Iran. It was all part of a plan concocted by Iranian Revolutionary Guard. They were behind the videotaping of the U.S. sailors, and they were behind the release of the video. U.S. Secretary of State Kerry was immediately in touch with his counterpart Zarif in Tehran. The release of the sailors was a quick deal, but the Iranian Revolutionary Guard needed to exploit the matter. The Guard does not like the nuclear deal. They certainly do not trust the United States. The deal is complete and sanctions have been lifted. The Guard is trying to agitate. They see the deal as a plot by the U.S. and by Rouhani to topple the current regime and to break their monopoly, that is the Guard's monopoly on the Iranian economy. They want to show the United States and the Iranian people, as well as the mass media, that they will not be lured into the point of view of the United States. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard wants to prove that Iran will neither bow to the United States nor will they succumb to the West and adopt Western culture. This is a huge statement. On the other side in Iran are President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif. They know that Iran needed the sanctions to be lifted, especially on oil, despite the fact that the drop in oil prices is not helpful to their bigger goal. The Grand Ayatollah, the supreme leader, seems to be silent and silently on the side of the Revolutionary Guard, and has only begrudgingly and cautiously permitted the nuclear deal. The United States wants nuclear technology to be secured, and they have looked the other way regarding serious violations and saber-rattling by the Revolutionary Guard, which includes firing a rocket dangerously close to U.S. ships and testing long-range ballistic missiles. In truth, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on 11 companies responsible for ballistic missiles. The capture of the U.S. sailors could not have come at the worst moment for the United States and for Iranian leadership. It was, however, perfect timing for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. It was just at the point of the end of the nuclear deal's timetable. And of course, one could not miss that it was on the eve of Obama's last State of the Union address. Releasing the video was a huge embarrassment for the United States. The video went viral around the world. What is most important is that millions of people have watched as the Iranians forced the U.S. to their knees, literally and figuratively. Yes, the U.S. aircraft carrier was poised to attack Iran, but Iran trained their missiles and rockets on that carrier and many other targets. In the end, the sailors were released and the situation did not escalate. But the biggest winners were the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And the biggest losers were the U.S. and the Iranian President Rouhani. Iranian media is revealing a split in thinking about the nuclear deal, rarely made mention outside of Iran itself. On Saturday, a front-page headline read, "Nuclear Burial." That was a pun based on the removal and filling of Iran's only heavy water reactor in Iraq with cement. Another paper said, the filling of the reactor with cement, quote, hurt national pride. Both these papers side with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. They are far right of the political leadership of President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif. This tension should be alleviated by the supreme leader, but the Ayatollah seems to side with the Revolutionary Guard. When Ahmadinejad was in power, his policies were even more extreme than the expectations and wishes of the supreme leader. When the Ayatollah chose the next president, he selected Rouhani, who was more liberal. But he is too liberal for the supreme leader right now. And so, it seems that the Supreme Leader is siding more with the Revolutionary Guard. This makes the entire situation very difficult to predict. There's a serious blowback that will take place in Iran. If the Supreme Leader is unhappy with the deal, he will need to be convinced that lifting the sanctions are a panacea for all the ails Iran is confronting. And that we will only know after some time has passed. Coming up next, Points of View. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is a column from the Wall Street Journal. It was published on Wednesday, January 13th, 2016. The column is entitled, Facebook and Israel. What's not to like? Lots, it seems. The pun is about likes on Facebook. That's the device you use when you want to say that you agree with material posted. It's a thumbs up. This is a fascinating column, but it starts with a massive problem that the Wall Street Journal corrected online. The byline or author in the print edition was Sheila Kugel, but that was a mistake. Kugel is a Jewish cookbook author. This column was actually written by Amanda Botfield. Botfield is a researcher and writer for Stand With Us. Stand With Us is an organization that organizes supporters and lovers of Israel on college campuses throughout the United States and Canada. The thesis of the column is mind-boggling. It is based on a test that shows that Facebook is downright anti-Israel in its policy. Here's how Amanda Botfield begins. Many Israelis and Israel sympathizers fear the impact that social media has had on terrorism. They also believe that a dangerous indifference is at work in terms of what a site like Facebook will allow enemies of Israel to post on their pages. A simple and not too controversial intro, but then Botfield describes the test that will scare you out of your shoes. She continues, quote, to test this theory, on December 28th, the Israeli NGO Shurat Hadin, also known as the Israel Law Center, launched the Big Facebook Experiment, seeking to prove whether the social media giant has a measurable bias against Israel. The design was simple: create two Facebook pages, one anti-Palestinian and one anti-Israeli. Then report them to Facebook as violating the user rules, e.g., against hate speech and incitements to violence. Then wait and see what happens. This is a brilliant proposal, and the obvious unfortunate results occurred. Botfield continues. For the purposes of the study, Shurat Hadin posted twin messages on both pages, one called Stop Israel, the other Stop Palestine. The piece then describes how the messages got more inflammatory using words like death to and revenge, but always the same in each of the Facebook pages. They also posted graphic pictures of abuses. She continues, on December 30th, Shurat Hadin reported both pages as violating Facebook standards, using Facebook's report mechanism of a simple button click available to all users. Within 24 hours, Facebook sent the NGO a message that the anti-Palestine page they reported had been closed down. The page immediately became inactive. The complaint about the anti-Israel page, which had spiraled into an explicitly anti-Jewish page, also received a reply from Facebook. This reply simply stated that the content was not in violation of Facebook's rules. Wow. This is just the beginning. Two identical pages, just switching the names, and two completely different reactions, where one takes on a life of its own and becomes even more virulent and more anti-Semitic. What is one to think? These decisions are not made by machines, but mostly they're made by young kids in their 20s. There is a clear and obvious bias. Amanda Botfield then states her conclusion. She writes, while Facebook's double standards are troubling, the media giant is not at the root of the problem. Facebook serves as an avenue for culture. It is not its initial creator. Yet, if anti-Israel bias or even anti-Semitism has entered the mainstream, then perhaps Facebook may want to reconsider its role as a bystander. Botfield is correct. but softens the point at the end. Facebook must attempt to clean up their platform. They must be consistent. Certain things are simply unacceptable, like promoting all forms of hatred and violence. And it should go without saying, Facebook should not be a home for anti-Semitic ideas. Second up is a column dated January 15th, 2016, at 2:45 p.m. It's an online blog. That's how we know the time. It was published on the blog/opinion section of U.S. News and World Report. The essay or blog is by Sean R. Liedman. These blog opinion columns vary from site to site. The basic idea is that they are short, pithy opinion pieces about a hot issue. The concept behind these blog posts is to invite thoughtful outsiders to stimulate conversation on the website in the talk back and columns sections. Liebman disagrees with me on several issues and on several of the most important facts of the incidents involving the 10 U.S. sailors. Liebman is a captain or former captain in the U.S. Navy, and he serves as a fellow on the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City. He was a commander of a Patrol Reconnaissance Wing 11, operating the P-8A and P-3C Maritime Patrol Reconnaissance aircraft. He has twice served in the Air Warfare Division on the Chief of Naval Operations Staff, and also as the executive assistant to the Deputy Commander of the U.S. Central Command. He was commissioned from the United States Naval Academy in 1991 in Annapolis, earned an MA from the United States Naval War College, and also served as a fellow at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. Liedman's point is to say that Iran violated international law by behaving the way they did. He begins. The release of 10 U.S. Navy sailors and their riverine command boats after the detention by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy near Farsi Island earlier this week was hailed as a sign of warmer relations and a triumph of diplomacy by both Iran and the U.S. While the telephone diplomacy between Secretary of State John Kerry and Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif clearly prevented escalation and brought an end to the crisis more quickly than previous Iranian detentions at sea, it papered over an important fact. Iranian actions were illegal under customary international law. Then Liebman lists 3 reasons why Iran was wrong in the way they treated the U.S. sailors. He says, the first legal principle that Iran's Navy violated was the sovereign immunity of warships from arrest and seizures as delineated in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Articles 32, 95, and 236. Even if they are in territorial waters, it remains unclear as to how the vessels entered Iranian territorial waters. A sailor cited engine issues in one of the propaganda videos released by the Iranians, while Secretary of Defense Ash Carter cited navigation error in an interview today. In either case, there is no legal basis to seize the warships and detain the crew, which is how Fars news agency reported the incident. So Liebman is saying that if the sailors accidentally found themselves in Iran's territorial waters, then it is hardly a reason to mistreat them. He then further continues. The second legal principle that Iran's Navy violated was the right of entry into territorial waters in one of 3 passage regimes recognized in customary international law and codified in Article 18 of the United Nations Convention. If the crews suffered a navigational error, their entry would have been justified as innocent passage, as long as their passage was continuous and expeditious, and they weren't engaged in any prohibited activities. If they suffered engine trouble, their entry into territorial waters would have been justified as force majeure, which would have triggered the duty to render assistance by the other U.S. Navy warship and the Iranians under Article 98. Blindfolds are unnecessary in the process of rendering assistance. Blindfolds are consistent with the process of seizure and detention. Here, Liebman is saying that, according to international law, Iran was supposed to render assistance. Liebman then gives the final part of his argument. Finally, arbitrary arrest or detention is prohibited under international human rights law, as is the transmission of confession videos of detainees for propaganda purposes as codified in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Liebman is right, but what is one to do in this situation? Take Iran to court? Here is how Liebman concludes his piece. Adherence by both parties to the United Nations Convention and other customary international law will be the key to avoiding future crises. And the United States should clearly make this case to Iran through its newly established diplomatic channels. Yes, Liebman is correct. Following international law is essential for defense, security, and economics. But unfortunately, there are other factors at play. Those factors are political. They are political on the side of the West and on the side of Iran. In this case, all sides look the other way. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to discuss 4 political cartoons today. The first is from a Northern European paper in Holland. It's by Arend van Dam and was published on January 15, 2016. The cartoon is entitled Wahhabism. 2 Wahhabis, religious clerics, in proper religious dress, overlook the globe. They're winding up little dolls and sending them out on their way. In the distance, the direction of the walking dolls is a city, and the buildings are blowing up. The message is clear. The religious leadership in Saudi Arabia, which is Wahhabi, is directing terror across the globe and in our cities. The next cartoon is by Chip Bach. It's from creator Syndicated. It was published on January 15, 2016. The Ayatollah is standing and Obama is kneeling, like the captured sailors. The Ayatollah is holding a sign that says the nuke deal. And Obama says, "Thanks for getting our country back on course." The parallels are obvious, and the pun of being off course and Iran handing back the sailors is funny. But what Bach is saying is that Obama is grateful to Iran for the nuke deal and the sailors. And in the cartoon, it looks as if Obama is groveling and totally under the control of the Ayatollah. The next 2 cartoons are by Dana Summers. They're from the Tribune Content Services. This first cartoon was published on January 11, 2016. It shows 2 men. One is called the left, and the second is called the right. They're both shouting at each other, and they're shouting the same word, denier. The left is pointing at a sign which reads climate change. The right is pointing to a sign that reads Islamic terror. Summers' cartoon illustrates the perfect parallel. Both sides are in denial about something that should be obvious to everyone. The last cartoon, and the second by Summers, was published January 5, 2016. It portrays the Saudis and the Iranians. Each, on their own side, is lighting the fuse of a bomb. The name of the bomb is the Middle East. Here, too, the message is obvious. The 2 countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia, are causing the Middle East to explode in a huge regional conflict. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. Is Tarina Shakil the new normal in our world today? Or is she a lost, wayward soul? I'll explain. Tarina Shakil, a 25-year-old woman from England, took her 17-month-old baby and traveled to Turkey and then crossed into Syria and joined ISIS. Before choosing to live in Syria, in the stronghold of ISIS called Raqqa, she lived in Burton-on-Trent in Staffordshire. That's in England. The 17-month-old baby is a boy named Zahim. And on her Facebook page, there are pictures of the 2 of them together in Raqqa. Tarina claims that ISIS kidnapped her and tried to force her into marriage. Facebook and other social media show her to be a public relations advocate for ISIS. Before she left England, Tarina wrote a farewell letter to her family. While in Raqqa, she continued to correspond through Facebook and texting. She was arrested in February 2015 at Heathrow Airport when she returned to London. Her trial is beginning now. How did this TOWIE fan from England take her infant son and join ISIS? TOWIE, by the way, for those who don't know, stands for The Only Way is Essex, hardcore British soccer fans of the Essex Football Club. The case against Tarina Shakil is very strong, despite her claims that she was kidnapped and is frustrated and disillusioned. European security forces say that 5,000 Europeans have made their way to Syria and to Iraq to fight for ISIS. Many have been killed, many are still there, and many have returned. The question is, how many of those who have returned are disillusioned and frustrated, and how many are actually ISIS terrorists or ISIS recruiters? There's more. The FBI arrested 2 men in Richmond, Virginia. One was arrested at the airport on his way to join ISIS in Syria. The other was arrested near Richmond. The second man helped plan the trip and had dropped off the first man near the airport. He took a taxi the rest of the way. The plan was to get to Syria by flying from Richmond to Chicago, and then from Chicago to Amman, Jordan. And from Amman, Jordan, he would somehow make his way into Syria. The FBI found out about these 2 men because a third person, the person coordinating the trip, was an FBI informant. This is an important illustration of how people just get on planes and go off to advance the ISIS cause. The problem, which should be obvious, is that it is almost impossible to stop this from happening. Had it not been for the informant, the arrest would never have been made in the first place, and the first person would have been in Syria. Joining ISIS is so easy. It's as simple as buying an airline ticket. In combating ISIS recruitment, we need to find better ways to stop them. And finally, the results of a very interesting survey that took place in October of 2015 have been released. They offer hope for our future. 5,374 people, both men and women, were surveyed in Morocco, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, and the Palestinian territories by the Zogby Research Services. 75% of the people between the ages of 15 and 34 living in the Middle East said that ISIS and Al-Qaeda were a perversion of Islam. They also say that they blame the emergence of these extremist groups on corruption and poor leadership. Quote, at least 3/4 of millennial respondents in all countries surveyed said movements like ISIS and Al-Qaeda are either a complete perversion of Islam's teachings or mostly wrong. In Morocco and the United Arab Emirates, over 90% of those surveyed said that ISIS and Al-Qaeda were a complete perversion. In Egypt, 83% concurred, also saying that ISIS and Al-Qaeda were a complete perversion. In the Palestinian Authority and Saudi Arabia, the numbers were lower, and the sentiment not as dramatic. 55% said the groups were distorting Islam. It should be noted that there's a difference between distortion and complete perversion. This is very good news. Now we need to see the millennials behind these numbers standing up and stopping the perversion and the distortion. If that were to happen, it would be a huge step towards defeating extremism. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Earlier in the show, I mentioned Wahhabism. Wahhabi is a form of Sunni Islam that is the official practice in Saudi Arabia. It's often called Sunni fundamentalism, ultra-conservative, puritanical, austere. Wahhabis do not like to be called this at all. They don't like to be called Wahhabis. It was named after Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, who lived from 1703 to 1792. The main idea was to purge external influences from Islam, especially pagan and Christian influences, like shrines and tombs and cults of saints. It's for that reason that the Wahhabis do not want to be called after their founder. He rejected that kind of Islam and that had any links to leaders or worshiping or any memorialization of leaders, just as Wahhabis do today. So they prefer to be called Salafi Muslims. Followers of Wahhab created an agreement with the founder of the House of Saud. They worked together for 150 years. In 1932, when Saudi Arabia was established, the system became even more formal. The system was very simple. Saudis would control the political side, and the Wahhabis would manage the education and the religious side. That arrangement continues to this day. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.